Alright, hello and welcome. My name is Anthony, or if you know me on Second Life, it's Asami. And I want to do a quick tutorial here, just as sort of an introductory thing to Blender. I assume you more or less know the basic controls. You've got your main window set up, but I'm going to make us a UV mapped barrel. It's a nice simple object, and it'll just cover basic modeling principles and basic UV unwrapping. So let's begin, as you should always, with a bit of reference. Go ahead and open up Chrome, and you want to look for a wooden barrel. Go into images, you get plenty of images of wooden barrels. And we want to identify some common traits among all these barrels, so you'll see that pretty much all of them are made out of these vertical wooden slats, and they have these metal bracers around them to hold them together. Another thing you'll notice is common amongst most of them, although not all, is that they'll have any number of metal slaps around the side and also the top and bottom to hold those together. So with that knowledge in mind, we can really quickly begin. You go ahead to add mesh, and we want a cylinder. Now mine is already set to 12 vertices along the side, which is perfect for me. You may want less, you may want more, depending on how high resolution you're going. But I like 12, it's a nice even number that allows us to get some nice caps on the top and bottom of our barrel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my numpad to go into front orthographic view. I'm going to go into edit mode, and then I'm going to scale our barrel down a bit. I'm going to make it about 1 meter tall. And you see there, if I look over here, our dimension is just under a meter, which is fine. So you go back into edit mode, and I'm going to scale it up along the z-axis a bit. Just enough so that it looks like the tops and bottoms are about the size that I want the end caps of the barrel to be. So now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and hit Control and R and use my scroll wheel to add some edges here. I'm just going to add 3, and then what I'll do is I will scale those edges out a bit. Right about there looks good. And then I'll take the center edge. You can do this by holding Alt and right clicking, and it'll select an entire edge loop. And I'll scale this out a little bit like that. That looks good. And what I'll do is I'll use these 2 edges here as my side slats, and then I'll add some extras around the top and bottom. Now these are a bit too far down the barrel, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this one up just a bit by double tapping G, and then I can look here in the lower left to see basically a numerical value of where that edge is from -1 to +1, and it looks like it's good at right here about -0.25. So I'll just hit -0.25, and that's just so that I can get this one perfect as well, so they're both even. I'll hit double tap G again, and then this one is on the positive, so I'll hit 0.25. Not 0.254, 0.2. Oops. See, I'm already messing up. Double tap G. 0.25. There we go. So now what I can do is I can take these edges and I can hit Control and B to bevel them. And right about there looks alright for the width of our metal slats. And then what I'll do is I'll add another edge here. And I'll add another edge here. And once again, I'll take these 2 and then I'll bevel these so they're about the same size. So we've got our edge slats. I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I might just slide this down a bit to about there. And slide this up to about there. Now this is because if we look back at our reference, while they do have slats at the top, you see most of them have some bit of a little lip on there. This one has a little bit of a lip. That one's got a bigger lip that you could see just from there. That one's got a little bit of a lip. That one doesn't, but it's constructed in a different manner. But you see very many of these have a little bit of a lip, and I kind of like that there. Alright, so now we've got our barrel, we've got our slats. The end slats are maybe a bit too thin, so I'll just go ahead and eyeball it a little bit. They don't have to be exact. Actually, I do kind of want this to be exact now that I think about it. Looks like a -0.1 is perfect there. -0.1 negative. There we go. Alright. So what I'll do now here is I'm going to go ahead and switch everything to smooth shading. You'll see we have our barrel, we've got our slats, and now we want to raise our slats out of the barrel. So let's go ahead and select all of these, and I'll hit E to extrude, and then I'll right click, because if you see our default extruding path is not very conductive here. So I'll hit Alt and S, and that's the grow selection. And I'll just pull on my mouse a little bit, get them right about there. Looks good. Alright, so we've got our barrel, and we've got the slats around it. But our face normals look quite ugly. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the edge split modifier here. And I want to uncheck edge angle because I want to define my own sharp edges. So what I'll do is I'll take this, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on my see-through here, and I'm going to just start taking all of the edges of these slats in the top and bottom and selecting them. There we go. So you see I've got all the edges here. And I'm going to hit Control E, and then I'm going to mark them as sharp. So now we've got our barrel, we've got some nice edge normals. Everything is cleanly cut. And I want to make the tops and bottoms of the barrel here. So I'm going to take these, and I'm going to hit I to inset them. And just kind of eyeball a nice thickness for the wooden slats around the edge. I think right about there looks good. And then I'm going to hit E to extrude again. And again, the default extrude path is not what we want, so I'll hit right click. And then we're going to hit scale and Z to scale it along the Z axis. And we just want to give it a little bit of a lip there. That looks pretty good. And now what we'll do is we can look, and just to make it a little easier to see, we'll see that our insides go straight in, and that's not how these barrels are constructed. Generally, you would want the edges here to define a plank of wood that's bent around. So what I'll do is I'll scale again, and this time I'll hit Shift and Z, so that it's only scaling along the X and Y axis. And I'm going to scale it out just a little bit so that the edges of the inside of that lip seem to match the curvature of the wooden slats. And that looks good. It doesn't have to be perfect, as long as no one else that's looking knows that you didn't actually measure. So there, I've got our basic barrel model. And Before I clean up these end caps, I'm going to do my seams for the UV maps. So what I want is I want a seam along the back of the barrel. This will be the back here. And then I'll hit Control and E and mark seam. And then I want the top and the bottom of the barrel. And I'll mark seam there as well. Now you can't see them around here, but if we turn off sharp edges, you'll see all our seams are marked in red. Everything looks good and ready to go. So what I'm going to do is, before I unwrap it, we're going to make a very simple end cap shape here. And the way we do that is we grab the three big edges here. I believe that's these three. Yep. And we want to join all these together, although it doesn't like to join all three of them as one. So we'll just grab that and join that. And then we'll go ahead and grab every other edge here. And that didn't work out quite right either, but we're just going to cut this nifty little pattern into the top and bottom of our barrel. And all that does is give it a nice clean edge. Just so that everything's capped off nicely and it gives you some nice face area there. So I'll do the same to the bottom, and just to be a snob, I'll make sure it matches the top. Alright, and this one, and this one. And this will also help you orient these edges just in case. Alright, so now everything is marked out and we are ready to unwrap our model. So you want to select everything, hit U, hit unwrap, and go into our UV image editor. And you'll see we get the edge of the barrel, or the side of the barrel, top and the bottom here. So you could do this the manual way, where you take each of these and you scale them along the x-axis, preferably with median point as your enter. Yep. And that'll have all those, get straight, and you'll have a nice rectangular UV map. But there is a lovely add-on called UV Squares. And it basically does all that work for you. So what you do is you go here, you select your UV island, and in UV Squares you can go ahead and hit 2 grid by shape. And bing bang boom, it automatically gets all your edges straight. And it does this using a calculation of the size of the faces, so that you get a relatively nice, pretty accurate texel density here. So if we go into 3D view and switch this to texture mode, you'll see they're not quite perfect, but those are relatively square. And then if we go ahead and go back into the UV image editor, we can select all our islands, hit Control A, and that'll just scale everything so that it's nice and even. Now, for the tricky part. We've got our edges, and what I can do is I can pack these to make sure they fill the entire UV space. But you'll notice that well, we've got this nice section here. We've got all this wasted space up here, and we don't want that. Now we can combine some of these to try and save on that space and get it compressed down, but it's not perfect. So we can combine these, but then we've got even more wasted space, and we could make this into a separate texture, but that's not ideal. So what we can do to conserve space is we can start separating some pieces and doing some tricky bits to kind of utilize this texture space more efficiently. So if we remember, our barrels have two main materials. We've got these metal slats, and we've got, or the metal straps I should say, and we've got these wooden slats. And if you look on many of these, the top of the barrel is also made of wooden slats. So this one's made of wooden slat. Oh, that's another 3D model. This one appears to be a real wooden barrel, and that one's made of wooden slats. Same here, although that's another 3D model, but you see, common occurrence is that the tops and bottoms are also wooden slats, just like the barrel. So we can do some tricky texture combining here. So if we were to leave this like this, we've got the wooden slats, which are basically these vertical strips, and then we've got the horizontal metal bits, which are these lines going through it. And what that does is, what we could do if those weren't there is share the wooden slat space with this barrel top. But we don't want those metal slats in there, so what we can do to conserve this space is we can separate out these metal slats. So I grab all this here, and we can hit Alt and V to separate it out. I might want to first uncheck constrained image bounds. And I accidentally grabbed that, but that's fine. I just move these out of the way for right now. And focus on just grabbing these wooden slats here, or these metal strips. So I grab that, hit Alt V, move that outside. Grab this one, Alt V, move it out to the side, and grab this one, Alt V, and oops, deselect that, and move this out to the side. Alright, so now what we've got is we've got our metal straps out here, and we've got just the wooden parts here. Now, because the wood is interrupted by these lovely metal slats, what we can do is be sneaky and make sure you have your snapping set to vertex, and we can just kind of combine all these by hitting G and Y and holding Control so it snaps, and we can kind of line all these up perfectly. And what you have now, oops, and not quite, we want this edge to snap to there. Alright. So now what we've done is we've created this continuous area of wood. So what we can do is texture these as a continuous area of wood, as though they weren't interrupted by these slats. And we can utilize this texture space for the top of our barrel. Now, you'll notice that the edges of this barrel are too big, and it kind of overlaps the lip of our barrel, which we don't want, because you see here you would have a small section where the edges of those wood slats are textured in, and you don't want that to show on the lid of your barrel anyway, or either, I should say. So what we can do is we can cheat a little bit here. Because wood is a nice organic material, And because even things like knots are generally misshapen, they're not quite circular, what we can do is we can get away with a little bit of cheating by stretching this section a bit. So what we want to do is we're going to set our cursor to 2D cursor, and we want our 2D cursor to be right here. Cursor 2 selected, and that should put our cursor at the very edge of this. And what we'll do is select all of these parts and scale them up on the Z or the Y-axis by just a bit, just enough to fit these tops in here. So if I scale it up a bit, look at that, I nailed it. So we've got the tops of our barrel in there, we've got our metal slats here, and if we were to just line these up and put them on here, we'd end up again with quite a bit of wasted space here. So if I were to line those up perfectly and line this up perfectly, and line this one up perfectly, and line this one up perfectly as well. So you'll see we're over the halfway point of the texture and we still have all this wasted space. So we don't want to waste all that space, and we can't have this weird non-power of 2-ish texture. So what we need to do is we need to squeeze just a little bit more out of a half of a texture. And we can do that because these two bands and these two bands are pretty much identical in size. So what we can do is, depending on, now this also depends on your texture. I mean, if you're going for hyper realistic, and you need everything to be different, you don't want your metal straps to have the same marks and stuff in them, although you can sometimes get away with that. People might not notice, and there are other tricks you could doing, like splitting these and combining them on the other edge so that everything's rotated around, but that's more advanced techniques for a different day. We're going to assume that you have a regular old just cartoony-ish texture, or that you don't really care that they're cloned. And what you can do is combine these so that they use the same texture area. Alright, by using our snapping there, so those are overlapping. And these are overlapping. So now we can take all these and we can move these down here. And you'll see that's just about perfect for half of a texture. So what I'll do is I'll take this and I'm going to go ahead and move my 3D cursor here again and take everything here, and I'm going to scale it up on the Y by 2. And you'll see that that fits pretty much perfectly. Well, not quite perfectly into our texture space. Now, ideally, you wouldn't want that to overlap that much, but it's such a small amount that you won't really see it. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and go here, and I'm going to constrain to image bounds, and what that'll do is if I scale this on the Y, you'll see it snapped that to fit perfectly in there. And so if I go ahead and change now my texture resolution to 512, You'll see everything here, and while it's very slightly squashed, that's such a tiny amount that you'll pretty much never notice it. So if I go ahead and set that back to media point, and I'll set this back to my UV grid, and we go out to here, you'll see that we stretched our wood, so these look a little bit squashed, but if you look at our straps here, and you look at the tops and bottoms, you really can't tell that those are not absolute perfect squares. I mean, you would never notice that in a million years. The only time that might become a problem is if you were to add, for example, a spigot that's perfectly round. But even then, you can just tweak your texture a bit and cover that up. No problemo. And that's only an issue, you know, if you have like a spigot and it's got, you know, like shadowing or some other bit on the texture around it. It's not really an issue. So, what we end up with here is we've got a very nice looking barrel. And we've got excellent face normals. There are some advanced techniques you can use, like normal mapping, to make these slats not be perfectly sharp on the edges. But again, that's another technique for another day. But you've got your barrel. It's UV mapped. It uses a half-height texture, which helps save you some texture memory, because you don't need to fill in an entire square texture. Now I should note that this is somewhat Second Life specific, because I believe some game engines do not like half-height textures, they only work in square textures. But this isn't one of those times. You can have a half-height texture, and it saves you a bunch of texture memory. We are making pretty much the best use of our texture space we can by reusing bits for the top and bottom, and you know, reusing our metal bits so that we're using as little as possible. You could shave this down even more if you were to make sure that all your slats are exactly the same size, but you do want some variation. You don't want it to be, you know, absolutely 100% perfect repeating across all these. That makes it a little bit more obvious, but people might be more apt to forget if only two of them are the same. But anyway, there you go. You have a barrel. It's nice and UV mapped, and all you'd have to do for this is do some LODs, and those are pretty simple. You basically just, you know, for maybe one LOD down, you can remove these slats, or at least the edges of these slats, so that they are just, you know, kind of textured strips around the edges. You could cut down on a number of edges around here, just by removing every other edge from your UV end, you know, like that. And another trick for doing LODs is in Second Life, each LOD has to have the exact same number of materials on them. So you can't have, for example, an object with 3 materials but only one triangle, because that one triangle can only have one material, and Second Life will complain at you and it won't upload it. So a nice trick for that is take advantage of Second Life's normal and specular maps. Leave this as one material. Do your slats as, you know, the same texture, the same face, and just separate them material-wise by using specular maps, so that your wood looks like wood and your metal looks like metal. And normal maps as well, because if you remember, the alpha channel of your normal map is your specular exponent. So if you modulate all that so that this entire barrel uses the same settings, you can take this barrel. Now obviously this is not ideal at all, but you could take it down to, theoretically, one triangle with one material, and Second Life won't complain because it's all one material. But that just is a nice trick to let you get as few triangles as you possibly can by tricking the system and saying, oh, well, you know, my materials are all or my entire object is one material, even though you are using tricks to get it to appear as multiple materials. And that's just a nice little trick from me to you, and a little bit of info on how Second Life handles things. But there you go. There's a simple tutorial on how to make a barrel in Blender. I hope I've helped you greatly today, and have a nice day, and I'll see you next time.